Good afternoon and welcome to the College of Journalism and Mass Communications here at Nebraska. My name is Rick Alloway and I have the pleasure of introducing today's guest, a pioneer of the earliest blogging platform, according to CNN, and a technological visionary, according to The Telegraph. Evan Williams is an American entrepreneur who has co-founded two of the biggest services on the internet, Blogger, which he ran for 4 years before selling to Google in 2003, and Twitter, where he was CEO for 2 years and now serves on the board of directors. Most recently, Ev launched Medium, a new publishing platform where he serves as CEO. Referred to as a pivotal force in a communications revolution by the New York Times, Evan was raised on a farm near Clarks, Nebraska, and had a brief stint as a student here in the College of Journalism and Mass Communications. He's been recognized as one of Inc. magazine's Entrepreneurs of the Decade, one of the 100 most influential people in the world, according to Time, and named a young global leader by the World Economic Forum. Tomorrow, he will add college commencement speaker to his list of accolades as he receives an honorary Doctor of Humane Letters from the University of Nebraska. Please welcome Evan Williams and our moderator, Teresa Paulson, Chief Communications and Marketing Officer at Nebraska.
Welcome, everybody, and welcome, Ev. Thanks for joining us here today.
That was a heck of an introduction.
I know. I was wondering when it was going to be over.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you.
So I think that's longer than the introduction you're getting tomorrow. So bask in the glory today. So thanks, everybody, for being here. We've got questions for Ev, but mostly we want this to be interactive and participatory. So please take a hold of that microphone when we start sending that around. I'm just going to start with a few questions for Ev. I grilled him on a few things in the car on the way here, but he didn't answer all of them sufficiently, so we're going to go back over those. No, just kidding. So, honorary degree, so that's a pretty big deal.
It's cool.
I would assume.
Yeah.
So what did you think when the university contacted you and said, we want to do this?
Sophia's laughing. She's my assistant, and we debated it a bit. I didn't know. I thought, well, that's amazing. And mostly it was, can I come back at these dates and be good to see the family and whatnot. And but then I didn't realize that I was agreeing to give the commencement address. To tell you the truth, I thought I'll take the degree. That seems good. And then Sophia said, well, they want you to give the commencement address. I'm like, but eventually I got comfortable with that idea. Well, I'll be comfortable with it after it's done tomorrow.
Agreed.
Hopefully. But it is an honor, and both things are a huge honor and opportunity, so I appreciate it.
Good. I wanted to tell you guys also, if you would like to submit a question using technology, we just use the hashtag via Twitter at hashtag EV, EV, at ATUNL. So it's right there behind you, in case you've forgotten already. Okay, so just a few more questions. So I think people are interested and curious about your experience here at the University of Nebraska and in Nebraska, and I know that you'll talk a little bit more about that tomorrow in the commencement address, but we'd love for you just to highlight a little bit of your story, if you would.
Sure.
And I also, I really want you to talk a little bit about Medium and what you're doing with that right now.
Okay. Well, my time here was brief but memorable. As we all come to college is a huge deal, and I came from the farm here, and Lincoln was huge to me, and it's very exciting as we've all been through to be a freshman in college. I had no idea what I wanted to study. I wasn't really into high school. I wasn't never into school, so I still wasn't when I came here, and. But it was more the social and the cultural experience of being here that I remember more than anything. And so just even walking around campus, and I have fond memories of. And then I lived in Lincoln a few years after that, and I started my first company here. And it was great. So it's I can go into any more of that, but it's actually fun. I brought one of my former roommates from college lives in San Jose with me, and he came out with me today.
Good.
And he was reminding me of lots of great stories that I don't really remember. So.
Cool. think we can all relate.
Yeah, yeah.
So Medium, that's
Yeah.
what you're doing now, right?
It is, yeah. It's been 5 years, actually, I've been working on Medium. So it's a big project. And it's really, the reason I started Medium was to, even 5 years ago, and when I was, even when I was still working on Twitter, my sense was the feedback mechanisms, as building Twitter and really building internet services in general, cause you to think a lot about feedback loops and which drive behavior. And when you're building a system, like any of these systems we're familiar with now, you're really designing feedback loops. That's what you're trying to get people to do something that will cause more people to do more things. And so thinking about that and then thinking about how the feedback loops of the internet or the web, what effect they were having on the information that people consume and even the information that is created and published, I thought, well, it's in a bad situation mostly because of the funding model and what was rewarded. So you get more of what you reward. And what was rewarded from a commercial perspective is getting attention, purely. There's no reward for analysis, truth, depth, all the things that make people smarter and that you would want the world's most powerful information system that ever existed to deliver. Those things weren't rewarded, basically at all. And so that was something a lot of us have been observing and thinking about for a long time, since the beginning of the internet. Beginning of the internet, we thought it was all going to be awesome, and then we saw sort of the deterioration of quality journalism and quality information and the huge amount of noise that we're all familiar with today. And the other thing was Twitter really taught me about networks, and that the value and the power of the internet was really about networks, which is not something I realized when I built Blogger. Blogger was more about software and was built on this kind of old model. Even though Blogger was now what we'd say is in the cloud software, the model was very much, it's software to build and publish a website. And so you'll have your website and I'll have my website, and they're connected loosely through the web, but they're not a network in the same sense that Twitter or Facebook or Instagram and all these things. Now we understand there's these connections that are tightly integrated. And what those connections are designed for is distribution and feedback. And so you put something in, it gets distributed, and you get feedback on it, and that's what causes people to do more of it. That didn't exist. The social media, when we created the follow for Twitter, no one had ever used that term before. And there was subscribing. You could subscribe to mailing lists. You could subscribe to RSS feeds. But this whole idea of you have a channel then, or a connection between the point of publish to the end user, was fairly new. I mean, other than magazines and newspapers have subscribers, but websites didn't.
Right.
And that eventually we realized that was where the real power was. And so to bring it back to Medium, I realized, okay, that was something we now all understood and was driving social media. I was convinced the same thing would happen to non-social media or more substantive information. It was still subject to network effects, and eventually it would make more sense, no matter what you're publishing, to put it into a system that had built-in distribution and feedback than to put it on a website that was an island on the web somewhere and then try to get people to come there, and even if they did come, you didn't know who they were, and if you wanted them to interact, they weren't logged in, and there's way too much friction in that system. So these were the two ideas: the deterioration of media online, and there's a trend that seems like it's going to mean there's a rise of platforms, and there's not going to be a ton of them. Let's build the platform for quality information, and it will have built-in distribution, and it'll be a publishing system that allows you to do things much more substantive than social media, but it will have a built-in network. And so that's what we set out to build 5 years ago. That was a very long answer to the question.
That's okay.
But I thought about this a lot. And that's what we're still building.
What's the business model?
So the business model is what's changed. And it was fairly recently, in January of this year, we came to a turning point with Medium. So we had been building the network for a while, and last year, we had always had the intention to start with individuals or user-generated content. And we saw a lot of value in that, because when it comes to writing, unlike many other forums, there's a lot of really smart individuals out there who can offer knowledge and perspective and ideas, and they can do it at a level of quality that's pretty darn good. And this isn't news or reporting necessarily, but it's expertise and knowledge and perspective. And so Medium was a great place to do that, but we know we wanted also more professional content. And so we started working with professional publishers, and obviously they need to pay the bills. And so we then started working with brands and building some advertising products. And we thought we could do that in a way that was better than the rest of the web, and we could create a good user experience around it. And similar to Twitter, all the advertisers were actually, it was all native, and so we weren't like pointing out to terrible websites, it was all Medium content. But the math just didn't work, and you can't, even with the most aggressive ads, you can't really pay for really quality information production, at least in prose, with ads. It's just a terrible ad format. There's, the supply and demand don't work, and it doesn't pay the bills, which is why the whole industry is saying, okay, we got to put up paywalls or get donations and everything else. So that seemed clear, and it seemed like it was ultimately going to cause the same feedback loops that we saw on the web, because what advertisers ultimately pay for is attention. And so it occurred to me fairly late that there's no way to build the right incentives and feedback as long as the people paying the bills are the advertisers, because not the end user. So we switched beginning of this year to a subscription model, stopped doing advertising, and now we're doing all the same things we were before in terms of a platform where anyone can publish, but there's a subscription tier. And so now really the goal is to just create a great experience and content that is good enough. So the feedback loop is very direct. If it's really good, people will pay for it. If they're not getting that value out of it, not just spending time on it, but getting value out of it, they'll stop paying for it. So our goal is very clear, but we're very early on that path. Most of the content on Medium is free, and there's millions of users who use it for free, and we're just starting to ramp up the subscription business.
Awesome. Great article today about fake IDs and getting them from China.
Really?
Oh yeah.
I didn't see this.
Yeah, so it was very informative. As a mom of an 18-year-old and a 14-year-old, it was really good parental information. So
I borrowed my brother's ID one time when I was here to go to one of the bars, and I'm sure it's still there. And I walk in. I'd never used his
The
ID.
Rail?
It was like
other bars?
I think it's on 10. And anyway, it's not on O. It's just around the corner. Has pool tables. And I walked in and I gave the woman my ID, and she said, "You're not Lincoln." My brother's name is Lincoln, and he lives in Lincoln. It's like, "You're not Lincoln. I know Lincoln." So my brother spent a lot of time in the bars, which was a detriment to my ability to do so.
Yeah, dangers of going to a small college.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. So questions from you guys? Don't be shy.
No question.
Yeah.
There's one.
So you mentioned something about the business model. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about the problems that you think people who are entrepreneurs like yourself encounter in trying to get their business started.
Yeah, so many. I mean, it's nothing. It's nothing but problems to try and get a business started. It's new problems every day. Even when we started many businesses, there are just new mountains of problems to discover. But they kind of fall into, I guess, a few different categories. I mean, what I do, there's obviously many different types of businesses, and most businesses in the world aren't trying to figure out if people want the thing that you're selling. If you start a restaurant or a laundromat or whatever, or some service, you know that people need that thing, and you have to do it better, you have to be in the right place, you have to execute well. And what I've always done is, I'm gonna create a thing that people don't necessarily want. So most of, you probably heard the term product market fit, which is in the last few years become popular. Most of starting a business of the type I do is about finding product market fit. It's like, we're gonna find it, we think people will want this if we get it right. But most tech companies fail because people don't want what they make. And so that's the biggest thing, way before even trying to make money, because if you're able to raise money, then that's not a worry for a while. It's really, do people want this thing? Will they use it? And if you start out doing that, what you don't know at first, if you don't have immediate success, which is very rare, you don't know, is it the idea or is it the product? Do we just not have it quite right yet? And if you started a sandwich shop and you had crappy sandwiches, you would be like, well, people don't like sandwiches, obviously. But they do. But in this world, it's like, maybe people don't like sandwiches, or maybe our sandwiches are bad. So you spend a lot of time trying to figure out, do we just need to change it? That's what I obsess on, is most problem. And then the rest of the problems are sort of mundane. It's how do you get good people, and how do you keep them happy, and then eventually how do you make money? I usually put the how do you make money part off too late, but
Why do you think that is?
not really too late. I mean, Twitter makes a lot of money. We just didn't make a lot of money for a long time, and
Well, now Mark Cuban's invested, so,
did he?
yeah.
Is this? See, I'm not up to the.
This isn't that recent.
Yeah, I knew Steve Ballmer took a huge chunk of Twitter,
Yeah.
and yeah. So
More people are believing in
yeah,
its future.
the reason we didn't make money for a long time on Twitter, we spent about, I think, at least $500 million, maybe $750 million before we went public, and it's still not profitable. But it'll do like $3 billion in revenue this year, so that's some money.
Amazon
That's
wasn't
not a-
profitable for a long
yeah.
time, too.
That's not a forward-looking statement, by the way, or I think that's
You don't have any inside
whatever
information.
whatever information is out there is what I said.
That's public.
But then it was very clear, building Twitter when I was CEO, which was 2008, end of 2008 to end of 2010. That's when we started the business in 2010. We started making a little bit of money, but the reason we didn't until then, so we spent about 4 or 5 years not making money, was just because we saw, it goes back to the network. We saw the opportunity was building the network, and if we could get more and more people connected to this network, then it was incredibly valuable. And we always saw that there were people who thought Twitter couldn't make money, which I always thought was silly, because it was like this real-time information network used by millions of people as well as businesses. It just seemed obvious it could make money, but it takes time. Like every day in building a startup, especially something that's growing very fast, is even though I have hundreds of employees, I have limited choice. I have a million things I want to do to make the product better, and building the business is a whole huge effort that we have to figure out from scratch. So if I can take the people I have, or even my time in the day, and focus on the things that can make the product better, or the technology better, or make it grow, I kept choosing, and as long as I can raise money easily, which I could, then it was a better investment to secure the position rather than to focus on the revenue. And then we kind of switched focus after a while. We got the revenue growing, and then it was like, okay, we need to work on the users, but I was no longer in charge at that point.
Got it. Question in the back.
He has
You
a
said
microphone, he wins.
I will be louder. You said you've thought a lot about advertising and revenue models for Medium. I'm curious what your thoughts on the sort of near-term future of advertising on the internet writ large are, and also what you think about Medium's revenue model for local media, smaller media, not sort of national and international-based media.
Cool. Well, I think advertising in the short term, It's not going to change that much. The trend is very clear, though, in terms of Google and Facebook own that market, and they're going to own. There's tons of other players, but they take the profits, and I think that will continue. Twitter will make some money, but I think Twitter is the third largest digital ad platform, but small compared to Google and Facebook, and it's hugely subject to network effects, and that's going to continue. And their advertising business, by the way, and Twitter's, I look at completely different than a publisher or any media-driven ads. They're in the media business, obviously, even though they say we're technology companies that are also in the media business, but they don't use that money to pay for content creation. So that works, and it's not even as detrimental to users and information, I think, because the feedback loops are different. But so I think they'll continue to win, and publishers will continue to lose. What's interesting about ad technology, though, is it's kind of like oil extraction, where even though it eventually is going to not be sustainable, they keep inventing new ways to pull money out of the traffic. So it's basically tracking and retargeting and header bidding, and all these advanced ad techniques make the same page view still be able to make money. I mean, it's amazing. Banner ads actually make money. They make tons and tons of money, even though we all hate them and think we never look at them and just like want them to go away. They make tons of money, but the reason for that is, even though there's an explosion, it's because of tracking, basically, more than anything else, and a very efficient market. And so, but like there's decreasing returns on that eventually. And so if an advertiser can buy, since they no longer associate themselves with content, it's not like I'm Rolex, so I want to be in Vanity Fair because that's where fancy people are, and I'm fancy, I want my brand to be associated. That essentially doesn't exist on the internet. It does in tiny sites and publications, but the vast majority of it is, I want to buy the eyeballs of the person who is in this realm, and I don't care if I buy that on Huffington Post or Vanity Fair, and therefore Huffington Post can churn out more page views for lower cost, and they do at an order of magnitude, then they're going to get the money, and Vanity Fair is going to be screwed. That will continue, and then eventually, as more and more of the Huffington Post, the supply is unlimited, and then the extraction technology will probably reach decreasing returns, and then a tremendous amount of the content that is high quality is just going to go away over the next 5 years, I think. And it's either going to be paywalled or the companies are going to go out of business, but there's going to be plenty of the cheap stuff, so don't worry.
Great. That sounds awesome.
I didn't answer, there's a second part of the
Yeah.
question, but my answers are so long.
Is Medium's business model fit for local media?
Oh, for local media, I hope it could. I think we're a ways from being able to do that, but I think local media could be one of the opportunities where we have one publisher on Medium, I forget where they are, I want to say Akron, Ohio, that is doing local media, and they built for a subscription or member supported. I don't know if it's paywalled or it's just more patronage, but it's a very early experiment. My hope would be that we could eventually have either within the Medium subscription or as an add-on or as its own thing. I would love to support local media. That'd be awesome, and that's an example of it can only be paid for either by patronage or subscription. It does. I mean, local media, some of it makes good advertising money, but it's hard. You probably know more about that than I do, but I think we can eventually get there. Another question?
Question.
You said earlier that you could easily raise money. How do you raise that money, especially for a business that is not turning a profit?
Yeah. well, you go and talk to venture capitalists. And on my side job, I am a venture capitalist also. I started a firm a couple years ago. But I prefer to build things. And the way, there's a lot of money out there for startups still. And even though most fail. And the process is basically now, it helps, this is one of the reasons that being in Silicon Valley is still advantageous, is there is access to capital like nowhere else, for startups like nowhere else in the world. It is now, like when I started my internet company here, I was trying to raise money, and I remember talking to some guy, I don't remember who he was, but I think he had made his money in plumbing, or cattle, or, the usual ways. And
I bet that was an interesting conversation.
yeah, I had to explain what the internet was. That was the first part. Which most people didn't know back then, but it was a long
Yeah,
road.
what year was this?
This was
Approximately.
93 or 94. And he was, the whole idea of startup investing and the internet and what we were, it was a very long path. I didn't get any money from him. Obviously there's angel investors and probably VCs here that do startup investing now, but there's no short answer to that question. But I think if you're not proven, with Twitter, I'd had some success, I knew people, it was just sort of like, but that's not the reason we were able to raise a lot of money. I funded it by myself at first, and then we built a product, but now you don't even have to, it doesn't take that much money to build a product. But we got money then because we had a product that was taken off, and we built that cheaply, and the people who got it, I actually went over all across, down Sand Hill Road, even when Twitter was taking off, and got mostly no's. Sand Hill Road is where all the VCs are in Menlo Park, in Silicon Valley, and they all said no. And so when I say money is easy to get, it's like, it's ridiculous. Most people don't get funded who are trying to get funded, but there's still a lot of money, and if you have something, usually now it takes a product though. It's not like a business plan. If you're proven, you can say, I'm gonna go do this thing. And if you really know your market, if you're not proven, if you're not a known person, then you have to have something, and you have to say, this thing is working to this degree, we need more money.
Speaking of Twitter, we have a question from Twitter from the audience. Can you talk a little bit about the strategy behind the short format of Twitter's content and how that truncated format has impacted communication online?
Yeah, so it's been so long that some people probably don't know why the 140 character limit, and that was a hack. It was built off text messages or SMS in the beginning. Text used to be limited to 160 characters because that was a hack, and that was a way, and that was before smartphones. So what we wanted to do was build this mobile system, but we had mostly flip phones, or I think I had a Trio at the time, and SMS was really, it was popular in Europe, but just becoming cross-carrier in the U.S. in the mid 2005 or 6. And I actually happened to have, I was lucky to have some of the people who knew about how to program for SMS. It was very esoteric. You couldn't just, now you can plug into Twilio or a bunch of other services and send text messages. Then it was pretty obscure, but I happened to have some guys on my team who had built, basically, they were what you'd call hacktivists. They had built, they were anarchists, and they were hackers, and so they'd figure out, like, to arrange protests, how to build SMS stuff. So that had been going on in Odeo, the podcasting company I was running, or just they had this knowledge, and then Jack had this idea about the status updates, and I had the experience of blogging, and so we had these like kind of 3 different perspectives that we put together, so that's how we were able to build. People built mobile apps at the time. They were like these Java things, and they were very like built for Symbian or Nokia and all these, and no one used those apps. They were mobile apps, and we thought, well, we're web developers. The beauty of it being server-side development, not having client software is awesome, and we can do that and be mobile with SMS. That was like the idea, and then, but it's 160 characters, so all right, well, we'll send little short messages. And it used to be, this is maybe only a month or two, but you could, at first, there wasn't a limit. We didn't cut you off. We would just send multiple texts. There's a limit if you sent it from your phone because you can only type so much, but if you sent it from the web, people would just get multiple texts. But sometimes they'd come in the wrong order, and you wouldn't know the context. So that seemed bad and messy. So we said, okay, it's only one text, and so we're going to have to cut it off at 160, which means however much you can type is 160 minus your username minus a colon and a space. And so some people can send longer tweets than others, and that's why some people actually got single character. Everybody got, the 26 single character usernames were our friends, so they could send longer tweets. And then Jack actually, one day, just decided should be 140. All right, sounds good. We thought maybe that gave us enough room for a little text ad at the end. We had tips in there at one point. But the funny thing was, the majority of Twitter usage has never been over text. Even then, that was the entire driver. And obviously, the vast majority is mobile once we had apps and smartphones. The majority was never text. It was always web until smartphones.
So that was programmatic driven, not philosophy driven. But
Yeah.
as you reflect back on it, though,
Yeah.
and that the fact that we've kind of lived in that world or all been exposed to that world, what are your thoughts on how that's limited, or maybe not limited, our ability to communicate with each other?
Yeah, it was one of those serendipitous happenings that had huge effects that you don't predict, and I think the effects have been positive and negative. We were convinced for a while that constraint did all kinds of great things. It lowered the bar, the ease and the casualness. It made it so no one was writing treaties on Twitter, so you could it was casual, and that had a huge effect on the adoption. It also obviously made it much more susceptible to be real time. So it was like it's very quick to write and it's very quick to read, and it can't be anything else. As well as saw that constraint drives creativity. We definitely saw that to be true. So we knew we stumbled into it, but we thought, well, this is just this wonderful attribute, so we're not going to change it even when we can. Obviously, today that constraint is irrelevant, but it's so core to the service. I also think it's negative in many ways. I think there's, it's not, it's good that you can link off and read something bigger, but where I think it has the most detriment was when it comes to replies and discussion. I think it's very detrimental to replies and discussion. So I don't know. I think we've discussed whether or not we should make it bigger, but would that ruin the soul of Twitter and ruin the brevities, the soul of wit essence of it? I don't know.
What do you guys think?
What do you think? Should we make it longer? Everyone hates that idea. The company actually announced that we were going to do 10,000 character tweets. I don't know if that was a leak or announcement, but got some negative feedback on it. I think 10,000 is...
During this presidency, it might not be a good idea.
Right?
Kelly?
Or would it be the best idea?
I don't know.
So to go along with that, is there anyone that you regret has a Twitter account?
Yeah, there's lots of terrible people who have Twitter accounts. And this is the thing we struggle with all the time, and not even, like, politics aside, when people are given a microphone and can be anonymous, they can be just terrible. Most people aren't. And we thought, I think when we built Twitter, we really came from this perspective that a lot of early geeks did, that the internet is not like the real world. Everybody's cool on the internet. And then the internet became the real world, and everyone's on the internet, and obviously everybody's not cool. And worse, some people are just terrible on the internet, even if they're cool in real life. But most of the systems that we've built do not account for that. So, like, we lock our doors. Well, maybe in Nebraska you don't. I didn't when I lived here. But in San Francisco, we lock our doors in our cars, and you know, I love having dinner parties, but I don't leave my front door open and allow anyone just walk in and sit down. But the internet, we haven't designed that way. We now design with information security, and when it comes to privacy and passwords, although that's clearly totally broken, but we haven't built abuse security or harassment security into these systems. And partially it's because we thought everybody was cool, partially it was based on a very strong ethos that more information, more exchange is good, and strangers could connect and the world would be a better place. And there's all kinds of examples of that being true. People who would have never talked, and we were sort of the antithesis of Facebook, and where the point of that early on at least was connect with the people you know in real life, and connect with people you don't know in real life because you don't know all the people you should be connected to, but which presented all these challenges, obviously, and now the amount of it's got a little out of control. I think Twitter, and the other thing about it is we can build better technological solutions to protect people from either abuse or just the hacking of the elections and stuff. We should get a handle on that. Now we're doing a lot about it, and there's a lot of people on Twitter. We don't have really. We've tightened up our policies, but there's a lot of people like Richard Spencer. I don't know if you know this guy. Richard Spencer is he's a neo-Nazi, and he's got a big following. He's very popular. He knows the Twitter rules like down to the letter, and he's always just on this side of them. But he tweets hateful things, and he's probably one of many. He's one of the more famous ones, and I just think, well, we didn't build it for that. And there's a lot of philosophical debate is, do we get into kicking people off because we don't like them or what they stand for, or is it about free speech and we need to still, our old general counsel used to say that we're the free speech arm of the free speech party, which I'm not sure. I certainly wouldn't have built it that way again, but it's really hard to parse out those issues and know what's right.
Mm-hmm. Jackie, can you use the mic just so we can capture it? Thanks.
So to tip off that a little bit more, there's a lot of discussion about, does social media have a social responsibility, not for things you don't like necessarily or agree with, but fake news and the impact that has. And so can you talk a little bit about what Twitter thinks specifically about their role in interfering or not interfering with fake news?
Yeah, I can tell you what I think. I can't officially tell you what Twitter thinks. I think systems like Twitter and Facebook and anything else absolutely has a responsibility. If you like, at least a moral responsibility, because they have great power, and with that comes great responsibility. I learned that here at the University of Nebraska. And okay, so if you accept that, then you say, what do we do about it? That's a hard question. And so I think Twitter is definitely, there are people thinking about this every day. How do we, they call it misinformation. How do we combat misinformation? And I think there are some easy steps because none of these systems historically have been designed to allow for that at all. I mean, even we've been thinking about abuse and harassment for a decade. We haven't been thinking about misinformation for a decade. We just started thinking about it. And we always, like, there's been misinformation, there's been crappy news, or what I call cheap news, which is actually harder, but the outright lies and just for commercial or ideological purposes isn't something we've ever even thought about combating. So if you think about it, like spam is the other thing we've been combating for 15 years, and we've developed very sophisticated systems to combat spam, and they're pretty good. I mean, it's interesting now. Like you used to open your email and be full of spam. Like, basically, spam is solved. Spam is more or less solved on Twitter. You don't see that much of it on Facebook or all these things. There's massive spam attacks on all these systems all the time. We've kind of solved them. Misinformation is probably trickier, but it's a similar type of problem, at least the most blatant kinds. And so I think we'll see over the next couple of years, especially with the advances in machine learning, that we can attack the worst of it. I think the much bigger problem is the stuff that is not so blatant, and so just like spam, they'll get more sophisticated. But the stuff that's gone on the last year or two has been just ridiculous. Even on Facebook itself, I made this Medium post. There's a post that Zuckerberg wrote, I think, about fake news, and beside it, when I viewed it, it had fake news ads that were someone paying Facebook and having like ESPN dot something and then dot co something, and it was a totally fake ESPN site with the ESPN logo trying to trick you that's ESPN domain, selling some supplement bullshit, and Facebook is making money off this on the post where Zuckerberg is talking about fake news. And so this was like 3 months ago. So that's got to be easy. I mean, that's just dumb.
So we've sort of entered this like age of innovation where that's like you've used the word multiple times already, and like this whole startup notion, and like we've taken classes on innovation where we read a book that gives us the 10 steps to innovate. Like, how do you feel about that textbook approach to something that obviously is not a step-by-step process the way it gets written out?
What was the book?
It was like Innovation Processes. The Lean Startup, we read that one too. There was a whole bunch of them.
Okay. Maybe I should read this. Process helps. I think process helps. I still struggle with it myself. I think it's not. I think there's an art and a science. I think is maybe. That's the way I think about it. And there's a lot of Silicon Valley, especially because it attracts software engineers that want to engineer startups. And that I think usually doesn't work that well. And it's worked sometimes maybe, but like nothing really interesting comes out of that mentality. And so it can be taken too far. The science can be taken too far, I think, because like to me, I've erred historically too far on the art side. And by art, I don't mean I'm an artist. I just mean like the vision. Like I don't have I didn't do some process that led me to an idea. I had an idea, and it was much more intuition driven. And then I'll often have theories. I believe in theory. So I had the theory earlier about where the world was going, and I think like you notice trends, and sometimes you notice these, and then you lead to the idea. Sometimes you have a hunch. I'm big on the hunch. But there's a great book. Here's a book I would recommend called Where Good Ideas Come From. Did you read that one? That one's good. I mean, that's sort of more of a philosophical, like, how did these things happen? And it's about like hunches and ideas that bump into each other and building off other things. And we figure most things out at my company by just like talking about it and writing about it. But then we'll build something and then we'll feel it. I'm also big on the feel. Like so the difference would be companies who like, is it this or this? Build both, put them in front of people and look at the data. That I think is not awesome. You don't usually make big leaps that way. What I like to do is say, wouldn't it be cool if this, and work with the team, and well, what about this, and so it's a creative process. There's a lot of deep creativity there, but then where the process comes in and becomes really important is not just to figure out if you're right or not, or how, like, you're never 100% right, so it's you have to figure out how you're wrong, but it's also to limit the number of things you try, because that's the really expensive thing, is the opportunity cost. You can come up with 100 things that are reasonable, or 1 million things that are reasonable, and you have time to build 3, and then that's where things like lean startup and that sort of, in being scientific and disciplined about, if you read Lean Startup, it's very processy, like more processy than than resonates with me. But if you're I think it's important to actually say, okay, I believe this is my hunch. How do I test it really, really cheaply? And then use that to fuel my hunch, fuel my creativity. And it's that back and forth in the balance of art and science that I strive for.
I've got a question for you.
Sure.
So you grew up here, went to school here for a while, and left us. How do we keep talent like you here, and how do we attract more talent to Nebraska?
Good question. I think I may not have. I mean, Nebraska's evolved a lot. Lincoln's evolved a lot. The area I was in, the reason I left was simply like I was alone. I had friends, but there was there was maybe one other internet company as an ISP, and it was just like there was no one around who knew what they were doing in this area, including myself. I had no idea what I was doing. So I needed to go where people who knew what they were doing in this area that I wanted to focus on were. And so if you were, if you're really into something that has a clear heart of where that happened, I think there's a magnetic pull that certain places will have based on, and they're going to attract, Silicon Valley is going to continue to attract great engineers and great entrepreneurs because the rewards of going there are very, very high. And if you're able to be a Google engineer or an Uber engineer or whatever, and like the rewards of that are so great, and if you like the lifestyle of being there, which not everyone does, that's hard to compete with. A lot of people would much prefer to stay here, especially, I think San Francisco's gotten less attractive from a lifestyle and cost perspective over the last few years, and there's a lot of attraction to a town like Lincoln, and as long as there's infrastructure and support and community, I think community is a huge part of it, and that's what I immediately realized when I got to Silicon Valley. Took it a while to get into that community, but then still, like, the things you learn just being at the right parties or the employees or that's powerful, but that can happen. That could happen here if there's efforts to do so. And the internet really, has changed everything. So you have access to information now, and you have there's probably accelerators here and all this infrastructure that just didn't exist before. So I think it's probably just going to get better and better. And the other thing is technology happens everywhere now. Technology used to be a vertical industry, and it was based out there. The computer technology, that is, and that's no longer true. It's everywhere, and it affects every single industry, and therefore the skills and the infrastructure and the opportunities are going to be a lot more distributed. New York will continue to be the center of media, probably, but now New York didn't used to have a tech or a startup scene, but now has a very vibrant one. Yeah.
Cool.
We have
Hi, Evan. I was just wondering what you think one of the biggest mistakes you've made as an entrepreneur is, and what you've learned from that?
Where do I start?
Leaving Nebraska.
Obviously leaving Nebraska. Things could have gone well. I'll tell you there's a concrete mistake I made, but what informs it is a much more more intangible sort of category of mistake. So the concrete mistake I made was I gave up control of Twitter. So as an entrepreneur, I was probably the last person who founded and owned 100% of a company that went on to be worth more than $10 billion that I lost control of. That used to happen to founders all the time when money was more powerful, but founders, the scales kind of tipped in Silicon Valley, so founders became more powerful than investors because of supply and demand. And so the terms on which you raise money are much more friendly to founders than they used to be. Much, much more friendly. Founders used to get screwed all the time. And so I was just on the cusp. I was on the cusp of many things. And I was on the cusp of just like the old, like both Zuckerberg and Larry and Sergey had, Zuckerberg had Sean Parker and Larry and Sergey had Larry's older brother who had bad experiences with VCs, and so they coached them to not sign bad deals with VCs, and they retained the control of their company. I did not. I lost control of my company, and that was dumb. And so that was just like I didn't have the right advice, and I wasn't paying enough attention. But that's a rare type of mistake. But the reason I mention it is that the reason that ultimately cost me is I wasn't paying attention, not to the legalities, but to the people around me and to my board, and sort of maintaining relationships. And so what I have tended to do historically is be maniacally focused on the business or the product or what I was trying to get done, and a lot less focused on those who were partnered with me, whether they're co-founders or team members or board members. And had I done that, then it wouldn't have mattered if I lost control of the company, because I wouldn't have had like people in disagreement with me to make that a problem. So that is something I'm still working on. I used to blame the fact that I was raised on a farm, there are no people around, so, but that's no longer a good excuse. But I've gotten hopefully better at that. I have more work to do. I think that is, and boiled down to just paying attention to people. And even though I'm still more product oriented, it's like, okay, I can't do this without other people.
Great answer. Relationships matter.
Indeed.
Anyone else in the audience? Otherwise, we have a Twitter. Okay. Hang on, Marcelo. Got to sit way over there, don't you?
I just have one main question would be what the future of the web and social is in your mind. And then second is if you're familiar with any of the startups of Lincoln and Omaha or Nebraska as a whole.
Cool. I'll work backwards. I'm not as familiar with, I'm sure I'm familiar with some things that are based here. I came to Big Omaha a couple years ago, and I met a bunch of founders, and that was super cool, and I was impressed. And I would love to learn more about the company, especially here in Lincoln. Feel free to tweet them at me or email me, ev@medium.com. The future of the web. I try to not ramble forever on that answer because it's a big question. But I think part of the thesis in starting Medium was a belief that things were going to become more and more centralized. That this isn't necessarily a optimistic viewpoint, and people I know disagree with it, but I think that the web is going to be less open over time. The internet is already a lot less open than it used to be, and by that I mean I don't think it's going to be regulated necessarily, or it's just that the amount of control that major corporations have over what people do and what people use is going to continue to grow. And it's for the same reason we started Medium, and what I learned at Twitter is the power of the network, and networks have, once they have critical mass, they get stronger and stronger. They don't get stronger forever. Sometimes they break, sometimes new things break through, but in almost every single category, whether it's retail and the power of Amazon, that is like a greater and greater percentage of what everyone buys, and the amount of attention Facebook has, or all of these things that just keep getting bigger. That was the thing we didn't like. The beauty of the internet was totally decentralized, and every mom and pop shop will be able to sell their goods on the internet. And even when we saw video was eventually going to happen on the internet, we didn't expect that 80% of it would be on one service. And all this great centralization has happened. It's sort of a law of nature when it comes to networks, that centralization happens. The fact that we now write software for people to use on the internet, but we have to submit it and have someone in Cupertino approve whether our software goes to our users, and we willingly do that, and that's like the main thing we do, is we would, like in the early 90s, never ever believed that was going to happen. That was crazy. That was the opposite of everything that was good and free and that the internet was about. And that kind of control, I mean, what people said over and over again is AOL lost because OpenOI's beats closed. And that would be nice if that were true. It's just, I don't think it's true. And so I think we're going to see more of that. And we're going to see a handful of major networks and platforms get bigger and bigger. And like I said, occasionally new ones will break through. Like Snap it's cool because it's a new thing that actually has critical mass. But it used to be, it's gotten way harder to build anything in any of these areas. And when we talk about advertising, because of just the massive control and gravity that the big players have. And it's sort of like the automobile industry and even the cable television industry were open, entrepreneurial, decentralized industries at one time. There were hundreds of automobile startups. And then there were 3. And they weren't startups, and that lasted for decades and decades. I fear, not to the same degree, that basically the same thing is going to happen with the web, and at least certain parts of the technology industry.
I mean, really, that movie was Circle just released a few weeks ago. That's basically what it is.
Is it? I need to see that movie. I started reading the book, but I didn't finish it. Yeah. There's another good near future book called Cumulus that is based out in San Francisco, and it's about startups. It's like the Uber / Google / evil Facebook company that owns everything. It's pretty good.
We're going to wrap up. Thank you guys so much for all of your questions. Thank you, Ev, very much for all of your answers and being with us here today. Thanks to Tyler and to Kelly and everybody else who helped arrange this. So we hope you enjoy your stay here, and I know we'll enjoy your address tomorrow. Are you going to wear your hat, when your regalia hat when you talk, or not?
I expect there's an outfit, a
There's an
whole
outfit.
get-up.
Yes. Yeah, it's called regalia. This is a new term I just learned, too.
Okay,
So
no, I'm looking forward to that. Do I get to keep that, by the way, or is that?
I think it's rental.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's important. Okay, yeah, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me, guys.
All right.